This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Cannabinoid Nation.
Starting, managing, and scaling a cannabis or hemp business is highly complex, from keeping up with regulatory compliance to the importance of having adequate equipment such as water systems, lighting, nutrients, etc. Operators face challenges on the daily that can be overwhelming and in most cases not the best use of their time. Fortunately, the team of consultants and specialists at Cannabinoid Nation provide best-in-class industry solutions that aim to increase the likelihood of success for growers, processors, and manufacturers. Cannabinoid Nation is the industry's premier brokerage and consulting firm that helps cannabis and hemp operators with grow assessment consulting, white label, e-commerce, website design, website development, and digital marketing services. The company also has trusted relationships with retail buyers to ensure that growers and manufacturers they represent get the best price for their high-quality products. Visit their website to learn more about their industry solutions at cannabinoidnation.com. Cannabinoid Nation, the cannabis industry's premier brokerage and consulting firm. Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast, your favorite podcast that includes industry-facing conversations with the industry's leading experts that aim to educate and inform the public regarding the plant's endless benefits. My guest today is Rob Davidson. He's the CEO at CURE Pharmaceutical. Rob, how are you, man?
Doing great today. Thank you. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for making time for me today. Really excited to be talking to you about all the innovative things that CURE Pharmaceuticals is doing, particularly in the psychedelic space.
Oh, likewise. Absolutely.
Nice. Well, before we dive into that, let's kind of kick things off at a high level and allow the audience to get to know who you are, Rob. So why don't you share a little bit about your background, what got you interested in, the pharmaceutical space overall, and specifically psychedelic research, and then tell us about the company origin story.
Sure. I'll try to take it in that order if I remember it. So, yeah. So my background is about 23 years, 24 years in drug delivery development space. So I've been in that for a long time, really looking at how to deliver medications more effectively to individuals. I did say 24 years. That it seems like a long time. I started when I was 5, so just want to put that out there. But developing a better way for patients to take medicines. That was really the key, and really that's why we started CURE Pharmaceutical. We really looked at third world countries and how medications are delivered. We worked in Africa on malaria, pediatric malaria, and patients were getting shipments of powders that they had to mix in water and then, give it to their kids for treatment of malaria. A problem with that is there's not a lot of clean drinking water.
I was just going to say water is a big problem, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So what they were doing is they were mixing it in juices and Cokes and Pepsi, and it was killing the active. And these kids would staying sick, or some were dying from malaria, which is very treatable. So that's where we developed a platform that didn't need drinking water. It was thin film, if you're familiar with thin film. And we decided to, see if we can integrate some of these medications on thin film so they're easy to ship to the patient and it's easy for the patient to use. And that's really how we got started. And we ended up with a couple of NIH grants and then developed it from there.
And yeah, when you say thin film, I am somewhat familiar with it. I did, of course, some research on the company before talking with you, and that's basically like an oral delivery mechanism, right? It's kind of a thin film strip that is orally consumed.
It is. Now you can deliver it several ways. You can use it, on the tongue, under the tongue, or between the cheek and gum. That's just different delivery routes. I don't think we'll get too far in depth on that. But yeah, it's like a Listerine strip. If you remember those Listerine strips, they were antiquated. You can't deliver drugs on Listerine strips, but that concept, it was really that concept that we went with.
Yeah, I was a big fan of the Listerine strips back in the day. For some reason, in like middle school and early high school, you would just have those instead of like mints for some reason.
They were great to have, right? They were quick, easy. Yeah, absolutely. And portable, if you think about that too, right?
Very portable. Yeah. I mean, the packaging was so small; it could fit in like that little tiny pocket of your like blue jeans or something.
Yeah, exactly. And the other nice thing about the thin film technology is it's highly scalable and sustainable. If you think about it, lightweight shipping, so you're not spending all that money on shipping and energy on shipping. because it is lightweight, it's portable, the packaging is smaller, the footprint to manufacturing is smaller. We don't talk about the sustainability aspect of that delivery system, but it's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, of course, with the example you gave, what country was it that you said that you were in? I'm sorry.
So many countries in Africa,
In
actually.
Africa. Okay.
The Ghana, yeah, a lot of different areas.
Got
So.
you. And you saw a need, right, for that specific type of delivery system, because of the lack of water in those regions, right? But
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, and then when you think about other delivery mechanisms, like there's people that aren't comfortable taking a lot of pills and
Yeah.
whatnot, right? So
40% of the population, to your point, doesn't like taking pills. That's a great, yeah. So, exactly.
so yeah, I mean that oral, way of consumption that you mentioned, that thin film is one way, but are there other ways that you see are trending or are in the works in terms of kind of future delivery systems
Yeah.
besides the oral film?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, there's a lot of different oral solutions. Oral delivery is the easiest, let's face it. Transdermal too. You've seen patches and you've seen, rubs and things like that. That's a difficult thing to do because the skin was made to protect us. It's the toughest barrier to penetrate. So it really wasn't made for that. So now you got to figure out how to penetrate it, how to get a molecule through the skin. So that's going to be a little more difficult. But there's so many unique like polymer systems and nano encapsulation. You probably heard these terms: liposomes, phospholipids, that are able to really encapsulate the active and get it into the oral mucosa or past the lower intestine more effectively, so you get a better absorption of the drug active in the blood.
Yeah,
And that's key for a lot of drugs. So
for sure. Yeah, and to play on that, especially within the cannabis space, right? Because we know that the cannabinoids are so high in fats, right?
that's
And
right.
it's
That's
and
right.
it's hard for the cannabinoids to be fully kind of ingested into our system within our liver and whatnot. So when you mention nano emulsion, that's just another way to kind of get it in there, right? Get it in the
Yeah.
system.
Yeah, we have some tricks even using thin film. So we have the thin film is made up of proprietary polymer systems and encapsulation technologies, like you're talking about, emulsions, whatever. But we have some tricks where you can really protect it. You create a cross-linking binder that it's like it gift wraps the active, if you will, and it goes through the gut. It doesn't dissolve in that area. It goes into the lower intestine based on pH. And when it hits a certain pH, it releases and gets absorbed directly into the blood. So you're bypassing the liver. You're bypassing, even food effect you have problems with that with cannabis or cannabinoid molecules. So you'll be able to get it into the blood quicker, higher bioavailability, and then you'll know what dose you're getting. The problem with, a lot of these products is you can take a dose and it acts differently each time depending on the food you have in your body, how it absorbed, lots of different factors. So
And that's one area, right? It's
yeah.
like, what medications are you currently on? What have you consumed previously in terms of food? How much are you taking when it comes
Yes.
to the amount of cannabinoids or whatever medicine it is, right? And so all those variables play a part into the overall efficacy and side effects, I guess, of what you're gonna feel.
Absolutely. You just brought up a real pertinent point in side effects, right? So imagine if you can bypass, most side effects happen where? It happens in the stomach and it happens in the liver, right? Or,
Mhm.
basically because you get this bolus effect of the active hitting the liver. So if you can mitigate that and you can actually get the drug absorbed into the blood direct, right? Uh, Bypass that first pass metabolism effect, then you can actually, we call that widening the therapeutic index. And what that means is you actually have a wider therapeutic window for treatment with less side effects, right? Because you're
Mhm.
not going into the liver in a bolus effect. By the time it hits the liver, it's dilute in the blood, which is the best way to clear out, right? So
Right.
that, to your point, less side effects is important on these drugs. Yeah.
Do you find that there are like particular delivery systems that work better with certain pharmaceutical compounds?
Absolutely. So the way we develop our systems is we kind of have a library of different polymer systems that we use depending on the molecule, because every molecule is different. So we look at chemical structures, we look at the size of the molecule, We look at if there is any known PK, pharmacokinetic profiles, and bioavailability reports. We look at that. And then we say, what is our end goal? We look at that end goal and we kind of utilize a computational analysis to really figure out which delivery vehicle or dose form we're going to put it in. So that's very key.
That's probably like step one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
And then flavor, right? When you're doing a thin film, you have to be able to flavor these actives. And some of these actives, let's face it, they don't taste great. So that's another, that's another IP. That's, trade secrets and patents on flavoring. That's what, that's pretty robust in our portfolio.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, this is kind of a great segue because I recently read that CURE Pharmaceutical last month announced that it's launching the first American psychedelic program, which basically allows y'all to now do some research around microdosing when it comes to psychedelics. And I believe that you're going to be using that oral film as the delivery mechanism. Is that right?
We are. There's different forms of oral film, but absolutely, we think that's probably the best way to get precise dosing. And remember, especially in cases, we'll do this all under DEA license. We have a DEA Schedule 1 license. I probably should have said that. We're also an FDA registered facility, so we can do research, manufacturing, all the studies needed to make this become a pharmaceutical treatment, which is really key. In the US, there's not many companies that can do that with psychedelics. So we're one of the first.
And let's dive into that, right? Let's
Yeah.
start there. So you mentioned the Schedule 1 DEA and FDA registered facilities. So you basically have the green light from the federal government, specifically, the DEA and the FDA, to go ahead and do research, human trials, right? On psychedelics.
So the first step is being able to have those actives in your facility, right?
Right.
DEA says yes or no. So what they do is they audit your facility. There's a lot of robust procedures that you have to comply with, security systems, things like that. So we have the approval from the DEA to be able to bring that drug active into our facility and also do the research and development of it. So yes, you're correct. When we go to human trials, we would need the approval of the FDA and we'd file an IND. And then we would proceed ahead on the human trials using the guides of the FDA.
And that application process hasn't kicked off yet. You secured the facility at this point. Is that right?
So the stage we're in, that's a great question. So the stage we're in is formulation right now. We're doing a lot of formulation work. We'll do some in vitro studies to ensure that particular dose form that we chose is actually delivering and permeating the skin. We have all in-house research and development that we do. We can do, cell testing. We could do, lots of permeation studies and dissolution studies to ensure that the active is releasing at the points we want to, and it's crossing the membrane that we choose. It could be buccal, it could be sublingual, or it could just be PO through the gut. So we'll mimic those environments in the lab and make sure that the dose forms that we're using work. Then from that stage, we would then file that IND and IND for clinical trials. So that's kind of the phased approach. And we're in the early stage right now, but we're pretty excited because there's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of research on the psychedelic actives for PTSD, for severe depression. And let's face it, the drug actives they're delivering now for this have more side effects than it does help. So I think this is a great opportunity to use something out of nature that, lends itself to a great treatment.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And even at a minimum, just be open to the idea, right?
Absolutely.
Because as you mentioned, like what we're kind of used to and accustomed to how we've been doing things for quite some time now. But and for the most part, it's worked for a little for some, but there's also been a lot of unintended consequences, right? Specifically when it comes to opioids and things like that.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the research boom, if you will, within the psychedelic space. So if I'm looking at it from like a 3,000-foot view, it almost seems like psychedelic research is far ahead and even more so accepted than, say, cannabis and cannabinoid research has. And I'm saying that only primarily due to the federal regulation that's been in place and inhibited that research and development of cannabis for so long, right? So, what is your view on the recent emergence of psychedelic research, and how far along are we in that space?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's growing, it's gaining critical mass faster than the cannabis space, which is very interesting. But I do think that's direct, there's a direct correlation between the whole cannabis movement and then then the psychedelics really just catapulting ahead of it as far as critical mass goes. If you really look at, Kevin, you said something earlier, I think you mentioned the boom in psychedelic research. Believe it or not, it's been around for a long time, the research on
Really?
these. Yeah, even the U.S. government, right? There's been studies in the '60s on LSD and
Sure.
psilocybin and other actives like that. So it's been around for a long time.
Yeah. What was that study that the CIA did?
Yeah, there was definitely some with LSD actually.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, in the military, and that's an interesting study in itself. But there's plenty of there's a plethora of studies that have been done in Europe and in the U.S. and really worldwide. So I think because of the academic side of the research with the psychedelics, I think that helps bring that to the forefront faster than the cannabis side, to be
That
honest.
makes sense.
And
Yeah.
they had more access in Europe in academics than they did anywhere else. And in obviously in cannabis space, a lot it was tough to get the material to study, right? And how do you purify? And there's lots of different genetics of the cannabis plant. So there's a lot of reasons I think that's catapulted ahead.
Yeah, no, the university entrance so early on definitely makes a lot of sense, right? Just because they're already there, they've been in place, and you're not dealing with so much red tape like cannabis is just to kind of get a seat at the table, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see states are moving fast on psychedelics too, right? Already.
It's crazy.
So
Yeah.
comparatively to cannabis, so there's a big movement. I think I think just like cannabis, the trains left the station. I'm not sure you're going to bring that back.
I totally agree. Yeah, and that brings up a good point. So for those listening who aren't familiar with psychedelics or have had experience with psychedelics, right? I have. I'm assuming you have, right? And or you have a great understanding of it from a science perspective, right? So why don't we talk about like why psychedelics is in the discussion when it comes to mental health, when it comes to PTSD, especially particularly for veterans, right, and whatnot. So
Absolutely, yeah.
why don't you go ahead and explain that to the audience for those that don't understand?
Sure. I mean, basically it has a direct effect on certain receptor sites, right, in the body that bring on a less of a depressive state. It actually brings in, I'm not going to say euphoric state, as you know, depending on how much dosing you take, but it really does rewire the brain, so to speak, in a very effective way that you're not as stressed and you don't have the depression. So it's really an effective approach to treatment.
Yeah, it definitely is, and I always say this, and I've said it several times. I'll say it again that my experience with psychedelics, particularly like psilocybin, is it really removes me from myself. And I know that kind of sounds weird from the offset, but what I mean is it takes my ego out of kind of my whole outlook and like everything going on. I almost feel like I'm one with everything that's living, you
Yeah.
know?
Mm.
And sometimes in our day to day, it seems like we get so caught up in like overthinking or small minor details that kind of get us off track or whatever, right? And with psilocybin and other psychedelics, as you mentioned, there's this rewiring effect in our brain where it kind of keeps us aligned, level-headed, and more, I guess, balanced,
More
right?
grounded, right? Yeah, more
Yeah.
grounded. Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a lot of the feedback in some of the studies, in academics in Europe, and really showing that kind of that effect and rewiring of the brain. And it lasts. There's a lot of research on microdosing and a prolonged effect on that as well, which is nice, right? With very, very minimal side effects. And that
Right.
that really is the key. To me, that's the key, right? when you read, everyone's seen the TV ads about for antidepressants,
They're so hilarious.
suicidal tendencies. Well, wait a minute, I'm already depressed. I'm not sure I want to take
And
this.
they've got families that are playing
Oh
hopscotch
yeah,
in the grass,
yeah.
and while they're showing that imagery, you've got, like you said, you've got that voiceover that's saying
Oh
side
yeah,
effects may include, and they just run
yeah.
a whole list of them.
It's a long list. Yeah, a long list, and
Yeah.
that's the problem, though, right? And they're not as effective. That's the other thing. So I think that's why we're progressing a lot. I think the military, PTSD coming to the forefront too, with really no true treatment for that. It's a no-brainer. Let's take a look at this. Let's see if this works, because there's a lot of good evidence that it will, and that it does, and we should be bringing that to the forefront. Just like cannabis, there's a lot of benefits to different cannabinoid molecules. It's not just THC, it's not just CBD. There's got to be more research on it. Let's do the research. Let's take it to the next level.
Exactly. And how are you going to, argue with a veteran who served our country, who is looking for an alternative, maybe the medications aren't working for them,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and that's why we got into it, because you look at it, the evidence is there that it could be effective. And now you're going to have people self-dosing and buying it from off the street in different areas. You don't really know what you're getting when you do
mhm.
that. So why not bring it under a little more regulatory control, at least in my opinion, and make sure you're getting the right dosing, and make sure you're getting the right, purity, if you will. Because remember, if somebody's growing this with some whatever, they're growing it a certain way, and they're using pesticides to force grow it faster, or they're using other chemicals, that could be problematic. But if you're doing it in a pure form, in a clean room area, an environment, and you're making sure you're getting the precise dosing, and you know what that precise dosing is, because remember, everybody's going to have a little bit of a different action or reaction.
Mhm.
So dosing is key. And that's the other beauty about thin film. If I do a 10 milligram thin film, you could cut that in half, and it's precisely 5 milligrams. So you could titrate your own dose. Say, this works better for me, or this works not, now you're gonna need more, or whatever. You can titrate your own dose based on your effects.
That's true.
It's
Yeah.
personalized medicine.
No, that makes sense. And
Yeah.
this is just kind of a little side question, just out of my own curiosity. So, like, say you have a thin film strip, and it has psilocybin,
Yeah.
right? As within it. So, in my experience with psilocybin in the past, this is kind of common knowledge, if you've had experience with it, is that you kind of feel sick to your stomach at some point, right? I think even with ibogaine, in,
That's
in
right.
some in some of
Yeah,
those treatment centers,
that is one of the side effects. Yeah.
yeah. So, with a delivery mechanism like the oral thin strip, the film, is that kind of alleviated those types of side effects, like the feeling sick to your stomach, or is that just inherently within psilocybin and what it makes you feel like?
Well, that's a good question. That has to be studied on its own, to be honest with, to give you that full answer. But yeah, that could be with certain impurities that are in the, in the extract. That could be other reasons. But yes, we do think it's going to mitigate the side effects by taking a thin film and maybe putting it under the tongue, sublingual or buccal, getting it into the blood, right, and
Hmm.
have it get into the blood in a dilute form. By the time it hits, the liver and clearance, you're getting smaller amounts are hitting it, right? So you're going to have, I think, the less side effects. And it's not going to have any irritation, I don't think, in the GI.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, just kind of a random curious question
Oh,
there.
that's a great question. Yeah, and I've heard that feedback quite a bit. When people trying it in microdosing or even macrodosing. I mean, they've done it always,
Right.
but they're getting different effects, and clearly one of those effects, a lot of times, and it's not always. It really depends on where they're getting it and how much they're using. They do have some GI disturbances. So
Got you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, so you've done a good job of explaining, why psychedelics can be beneficial for people with mental illness, particularly PTSD.
Yeah.
So, how do we change the conversation and the perspective when it comes to people that are unaware of what psychedelics can do?
Well, that's why I think it's important for smaller pharmaceutical companies to step up and really show that, yes, this is a treatment that works. and has a lot of potential behind it. And once you show that there's clinical research, it starts to change the thought process. You've seen this with cannabis. I mean, 5 years ago, people were still like, "Oh, we can't talk about cannabis. We can't you can't do anything about cannabis from a public company standpoint." But now you got public companies all over the place doing cannabis, right, and talking about it openly, and
Right.
CBD and skincare,
Yeah,
because
and
there's
wait till their employees start coming out of the cannabis closet. That's going to be another kind of headache for them. Yeah.
absolutely. And you even see the NFL looking at CBD and allowing marijuana for pain.
Yep.
Isn't it is better than opioids? Let's face it. So
Absolutely.
as the more research you have behind it, and the more we'll call them approved institutions that are actually working on it, I think you're going to see a change in thought process.
Yep. No, I totally agree. It's all about education and really awareness too, right? Like
Absolutely.
putting those testimonials at the forefront, and
Hmm.
it's hard to discredit those N of one stories, right? When
Yeah,
people are
absolutely.
firsthand saying that this is beneficial to their livelihood.
Especially when there's a lot of them, right?
Right.
When you get, yeah, and there's a lot of N in one story. So yes, I agree with that. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So, I saw actually a press release today, Cure Pharmaceutical. So first and foremost, y'all are a publicly traded company on the
We are.
Canadian exchanges,
Yep.
under
We're on the
the
US
ticker
OTC.
CURR, right?
Yeah, yeah, we're on the US OTC QB.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
And I read today that the company's total revenue rose 229% compared to fiscal year 2019.
Yeah, yeah. So we're starting to grow. We are. We launched several products just recently, kind of last year, and starting to gain traction on the direct to consumer marketplace, as well as in retail at certain areas. And a lot of it's on thin film technology that we develop on the nutraceutical side. We're working, as you know, on the cannabis side for pharmaceuticals and CBD. So we have a pretty broad range of products that are starting to get distributed out there.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, like, outside of the direct consumer, focus, is there anything else that y'all are looking to do in 2021 and beyond? Like, is that the main focus, or are there others?
No, we're really looking at the telehealth arena, right? Direct, working with doctors and working with healthcare practitioners, really direct distribution into those arenas. Working with several groups on that currently, as well as internationally, in conversations with healthcare systems in the Middle East, healthcare systems, in Europe as well, for CBD and for other cannabinoid molecule miners, as well as some of our own products, like the once a week dose of vitamin D3 on one strip, a full week's dose on one strip of vitamin D for immune system. As you know, it's actually been shown to protect against the COVID-19. If your vitamin D levels are sufficient, you probably have less severe virus or viral load.
Yeah.
That's
Why did they say stay inside all the time? That doesn't make sense
It's
to me.
it's counterintuitive, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny. People say, well, even if you go outside and you're wearing sunblock, you're not getting the vitamin D you need, because the sunblock is blocking the rays that you really need to convert to D. So
Right.
there's a huge amount of deficiency worldwide. It's definitely, that's a pandemic in itself, I believe, deficiency.
You know,
But
when
from
when
rest,
I
yeah, go,
when
sorry.
I was when I was coming down with COVID-19,
Yeah,
I literally went, because, like, where my wife and I townhouse is, we have like a private area with a pool, and
yeah,
I just laid out there, man, and just
perfect.
got sun, because
Yeah,
I figured
yeah.
that's one way to kind of help at least.
Well, I'm
Uh,
glad you recovered
yeah.
from it. I did not know you had that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
it wasn't as, I mean, I wasn't as bad as what most people got. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but to your point, so that's a funny thing you did. That was very intuitive, actually, to go out there and lay in the sun. Just a little history, not to bore everybody, but I'm a history buff. But the Spanish flu, which did not start in Spain, they just called it the Spanish flu because they reported the cases. But the Spanish flu, what the way they really treated them was they started taking them outside the hospital tents and leave them outside in the sun. And they noticed that patients that were outside in the sun were surviving more than the patients that were staying in the tents or in the hospitals. So there's a real correlation there. There's a
Look
real
at that.
correlation. Yeah.
Healthcare practices in the late 1920s are,
They knew what they were
you
doing.
know.
Cannabis. I mean, they were given cannabis as treatments in the 1920s, right?
That's right. Right before the
Yeah.
1930s prohibition happened.
Prohibition, exactly. So it was an interesting time. They kind of knew which way healthcare should go. So
Right. We're
yeah,
going back to our roots, it sounds like,
going
quite
back to our
literally, right?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So, hey, Rob, tell me about so you mentioned, like, you mean you guys have a lot of great things going on this year and in the future, right? You talked about that focus on the direct to consumer, all the
Mhm.
different types of products
Yeah,
and formulations that you're working on. And then of course we discussed the American psychedelic program, which is another just exciting thing that y'all are embarking on. So, um as you're moving along, what are your predictions in terms of more states going online when it comes to psilocybin, psychedelics, and even cannabis, like overall?
yeah. Well, all of the above, they're all going to start to proliferate approvals in all the states, I think, very shortly. I mean, New York just came through with cannabis, as you know. They just approved the bill.
New
Um,
Mexico also today.
Mexico as well today. That's right. That's exactly. So they're starting the dominoes are falling. So I think it's going to happen fast. And I think again, the psychedelics are falling right behind that. And you're going to start seeing those states approving as well.
Yep, I totally agree with you, Rob. Yeah, it's exciting times. It's definitely exciting to be in the industry, and of course, it's clear that Cure Pharmaceutical is uniquely positioned to be a major player in the space in years to come. So,
Yeah, we're excited to be one of the leaders in the industry, especially on the psychedelic space. Listen, when you look at most of the pharmaceuticals out there, their roots are really from plants and botanicals. They're basically naturally based. So when you talk about psilocybin and actives like that from natural plants or fungus or whatever you're growing it from, that's exciting. I think it's
yeah.
it's the best approach. Nature gave us a lot to work with. We just forgot about it.
I 100% agree with that. Well said, sir. So, hey, I really appreciate your time today and all the great insights that you shared. Where can people find y'all's website and social media if they want to learn more?
So we are on pretty much every social media: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, social media wise, and then I don't know, Instagram, I'm sure too. I'm not very good on the social media side myself, mostly on LinkedIn, but and then CUREforma.com is the website. Yeah.
Perfect. And your ticker again is CURR, right?
Correct. Yep. Absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And we'll be sure to include the links for social media in the YouTube description box for y'all to check it out. So
Great. That's perfect.
cool. Well, Rob, thanks again. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for listening.
It was fun.
Bye.
Thank you.